people who have done some very interesting collaboration in their part of the state. And they're going to explain to us how they've done this, why they've done this, and we hope that you all can learn from it so that you might want to do the same kind of collaboration in your community. The first person I'm going to introduce is Dennis Brack. Dennis is the co-managing partner of Rappahannock Media, which publishes community papers in Prince William, Rappahannock County, and Culpeper. They also publish local magazines, specialty pubs, and InsideNova.com, which is Northern Virginia's largest news digital site. Dennis became publisher of the Rappahannock News in 2013 after leaving the Washington Post Company, where he worked in a variety of positions in the Post newsroom, including leading the design and graphics team. Early in his career, he worked for Knight Ridder in Spain and Bolivia. And he had an internship when he was younger at the Fauquier Times-Democrat, which is now the Fauquier Times. Dennis is a graduate of Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. The next person I'm going to introduce you all to is Andy Alexander. Andy is a former Washington Post ombudsman and an award-winning journalist and news industry leader. He's been a reporter, an editor, and a Washington bureau chief during a career that spans 5 decades. That's hard to believe, Andy. Before joining the Washington Post in early 2009, he spent his career with Cox newspaper chain. He began a Cox paper in Dayton, Ohio, and in 1976, he transferred to the Cox newspaper's Washington bureau. Andy is a visiting professor. He's called a visiting professional with the Scripps College of Communication at Ohio University. That would be in Athens, Ohio, for all of you who don't know where that is, where he's taught journalism ethics and helped foster media innovation. He lives in DC and Rappahannock County with his wife, and he is one of the instigators and leaders of the Foothills Forum. The next person we're going to be introduced to is Bo Jones. Bo is director and president of the Piedmont Journalism Foundation. So we're talking about 2 different nonprofits here today. That was founded in 2018 to provide in-depth journalism coverage to local news outlets. In 2019, PJF acquired the Fauquier Times, which is, of course, a weekly newspaper in Fauquier, and the Free Prince William Times. Bo worked for 32 years at the Washington Post Company as VP and counsel, president, general manager, publisher, and the CEO of the Washington Post newspaper, and as vice chairman of the parent company. He left in 2011 to become the CEO and president of Neil Lair Productions, which of course is the producer of the PBS NewsHour, until that enterprise was donated to WETA in 2014. He serves on the board of the Associated Press, Newspaper Association of America, and the Greater Washington Community Foundation, among other things. Bo is a longtime resident of Markham, which is in Fauquier County. And our last but not least introduction is Larry Bud Meyer. Larry is a career editor, newsman, foundation executive, and he co-founded the Foothills Forum in 2014. He is advisor to the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism, which is an organization we all know about and work with. He retired in 2009 after serving 14 years as vice president and secretary of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. Prior to joining Knight Foundation, he spent 2 decades in Florida in print journalism, the last 4 years as executive assistant to the publisher of the Miami Herald. He's been living in Rappahannock County for the last 15 years. So welcome, gentlemen. All of you are doing interesting things that I think we can all learn from, and I hope we'll have a great and vigorous discussion today. Dennis, I'm going to start out with you because to understand the Foothills Forum a little bit better, I think it's important that people understand Rappahannock County. It's a county that's not as well known as some counties in the state. It's a smaller county. So if you could give us sort of an overview, a sense of Rappahannock County and your paper and the kinds of things you cover, that will be a good foundation for getting this conversation going.
Sure. Rappahannock is often confused with what we call the other Rappahannocks, which are at the other end of the river near the bay. We're about 60 miles from DC, so Northern Virginia, Northwestern Virginia, right in the foothills, hence the Foothills Forum name origin of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and right next to Shenandoah Park. And so the newspaper, is a traditional weekly newspaper that covers community government, community news. Rappahannock is interesting because I think it's a interesting mix of worlds. You have people that have been there for generations, and also people who've come from DC and other places. Many times, beginning with second homes and retiring. So it's an interesting mix.
What's the population of Rappahannock County?
A little over 7,300.
See, that's a small county in Virginia. So there aren't probably a lot that are smaller than that. So that's also interesting. But I want you to kind of get us going with this whole discussion on the Foothills Forum. What was the spark for it? I know there was an infamous meeting or coffee clutch that got you guys going, but if you could tell everybody kind of what was the spark and what the community needed and how you all sort of just set up the forum in the beginning.
Thank you, Betsy. Dennis and the Rappahannock News host a monthly get-together with the community called Fourth Estate Friday. And back in 2013 or 14, I'm a little fuzzy on the dates now, there was a morning coffee session, a big turnout from the public. Dennis and the staff were there from the newsroom. It was a good conversation because the news of the day was part investigative reporting and part front page article about a heroin epidemic in our county. It sparked a really interesting conversation among the attendees at that coffee session. And what we heard from that gathering the public was that they really wanted more news. There was a big appetite for local issues to be covered. And Dennis and folks at the time said, we're doing our best to cover the county and these issues, but we are limited by our staff size and our ability to get around and cover all these stories. And it got a group of us thinking, we wondered if there was a way that we could help in this. And it led to a series of discussions. And in 2014, the creation of a nonprofit called Foothills Forum. We are a civic news organization. We are nonpartisan and apolitical. We quickly worked up a legal agreement with Dennis and the for-profit company, whereby the nonprofit Foothills Forum would essentially provide content to the newspaper, worked up in together so that the stories were always being developed along a very clear and logical path. One of the first things that we did that helped us get going was to go to Charlottesville and introduce ourselves to the Virginia Center for, hold on, I'm blanking on this, Center for Survey Research at the University of Virginia, headed by Tom Guterbach. We developed a professional survey with them that went to more than 3,000 households in Rappahannock County. It asked residents their opinion about quality of life in Rappahannock, quality of services, and we provided a list of 25 randomly presented issues in the county and asked residents to tell us what they thought about them, their strength of conviction about the various issues. And from that Foothills Forum survey, which we conducted in 2015, and then published the results with Dennis in the newspaper in April of 2016, we were underway. We had a baseline of issues and topics that people in the county said they cared about. It's important, or we're actually proud that when we put that survey out, we had fairly low expectations, but we got a response rate of 42% from the citizens of Rappahannock County, which kind of blew away those people in Charlottesville at the center. It was twice what they expected. And it kind of told us that we were onto something, that we'd found a niche that we could fill with news and reporting on the issues people cared about. Topics number 1 and 2 were broadband and cell phone coverage. In our rural, mountainous, and remote county, there are big pockets without cell service, without broadband, and that exists to this day. So we had a baseline.
Gotcha. I'm sorry, go on.
No, that's it. I'm all done.
Andy, you're one of the things you teach is ethics. And so immediately I think, as somebody who thinks about journalism a lot, what are the ethical issues here? I mean, you're bipartisan, you're apolitical, so that's good, but how do you choose the topics? How do you walk that fine line between the copy or content that you're producing and the journalistic ethics that the Rappahannock, and I'm going to get you into this too, Dennis, the Rappahannock News subscribes to, one would hope?
Actually, I think it's pretty simple. I mean, first of all, you start with a partner like the Rappahannock News that's a good, honest newspaper. So it's rare that ethical issues come up. But it's also helpful that we have a good stable of veteran journalists. We pay them. They're independent contractors, and we have some on retainer. But these are people that have spent careers at the Wall Street Journal and been in newspapers, magazines. One of our lead writers is a guy who had been vice president of Discovery and digital and all that. So they know the boundaries. I think when you talk about ethics, the bigger issues we face are what every editor in America faces, and that is sort of educating, helping their readers understand what is journalism, and that's a bigger problem. How do we get our stories? First of all, we have a twice monthly meeting that is a Zoom meeting, and it includes all of our reporters, it ranges from 3 to 5. Bud is on that call. I'm on the call. A couple others from Foothills Forum. We have a photographer that's on the call, and then Dennis and his editor are on the call. And we kick around story ideas. We talk about what's coming up in the county, what are the big emerging issues, and then we make a decision. If it's something that requires a deep dive into it, chances are that Foothills Forum will take that, and that's because Dennis has an editor and, if he's lucky, a reporter, and it's tough. They're trying to cover the daily news, so they don't have time for that. And then we also separately have in Foothills Forum something called the Research and Journalism Committee. This is maybe a membership of 12, and these are people that include some former journalists, but a lot of people from the community. We typically get together about twice a year, and it's sort of a sounding board. What are they hearing in the community? What should we be focusing on? And then we refine stories there. But it actually works very well. It's like the biweekly calls are sort of like a small news meeting that you have. And again, it's so important for this to succeed. I think 2 things. One is you have a partner like Dennis who gets it and who's very accommodating. 2, understanding that we are all about nonpartisan journalism and it's independent. 3rd, understanding that Foothills Forum will do a story, but the Rappahannock News does not have to run it. This is the legal agreement that Bud was mentioning, and that's very important. And then finally, and I think this is an advantage we have, but it's something that I personally worry about. We have a great stable of reporters, but they're all retirees. They could all any day say, I've enjoyed it, but I'd like to do something else. And then we're going to face the dilemma every newspaper faces. How the hell do we get good quality journalists, ideally those who are in the community, who are invested in it and people see on a daily basis? But it's worked so far. It's been very successful.
Great. I'm going to circle back to you in a minute, Dennis. But Bo, I wanted to ask you to sort of explain to people here the difference between what you're doing in Fauquier and what they're doing in Rappahannock. And I know they may have been sort of the idea starter for your work, but you're running a different kind of nonprofit in Fauquier. So if you could outline the differences between the two, that would be helpful.
Well, first of all, we're a lot younger. We were founded, as you said, in 2018, didn't start doing anything till 2019, and had the same problem that Andy said about finding journalists who were somewhat knowledgeable, willing to work in Fauquier County, but were good. I mean, you know, it's kind of hard, and we haven't, like they do, we have a journalism advisory committee. Ours is very small. We happen to have, one is Dana Priest, who Dennis knows from the Washington Post very well. And she still works there some, but she's also a professor at the University of Maryland School of Journalism, so she can have access to journalists now and then, and actually brought in some interns to work with the paper and through us, and with the help of the Knight Foundation this past summer. And so that we're a county 10 times the size of Dennis's county, 70,000 people. And so we have a broader sense of issues in the county. It's not nearly as homogeneous as Rappahannock, though Dennis will tell me Rappahannock's not homogeneous at all, between the new folks, like a lot of the people here, and the old folks who've been around forever. But Fauquier has several parts to it, and the northern part was somewhat different from the southern, and the center and Warrenton seems to dominate a lot, and also dominate a lot of the coverage. So we look for stories that might go outside of Warrenton particularly, and deal with issues that might not be picked up with the regular reporters. But we have the same kind of dynamics that they do. As an institution, we are much smaller. We had just 3 members of the board, all volunteers, and as well as the journal advisory people. But we acquired the Fauquier Times newspaper at the late in 2019. They were having trouble surviving. People who loaned them money felt it wasn't they didn't want to invest more in it, and it seemed like it had a better chance of success if it had a nonprofit owner where people could, we could go to the broad community for support. And it's that notion that led to the foundation of Foothills, of PJF. We got a lot of help from Dennis and the others on how to set up the legal agreement with the newspaper originally. But the ultimate collaboration is is when you end up owning the newspaper. It's like marriage. We're married to the newspaper now, the ultimate partner. And so our money now goes to support the newspaper, but we also do some journalism, but it's not as consistent as they do it. We added a couple of members to our board. One who was an accountant by training. We thought we needed that, and then somebody else who is a very strong philanthropist in Fauquier County. And the transition was able to be made because we thought there were enough people in Fauquier who would be willing to support the paper. It didn't matter how many people really supported the Foothills Forum, because we could tailor the amount of journalism we offered to how much money we could raise, as well as whether we could get the reporters. But now we have to think about raising money for both, and what we do in the journalism depends in part on what may be needed for the newspaper to keep it afloat. That would be, I would say, the biggest difference, other than the fact that we are much smaller. PJF is a much smaller operation than Foothills is in terms of the operation of it.
Okay. Dennis, I'm going to go back to you real quick, because we had a speaker yesterday from Oregon. His name is Les Zates, and I don't know if any of you tuned into that, but Les is a former investigative reporter, the Oregonian. George Polk winner, Pulitzer finalist. And he bought a paper in Western Oregon, and he has doing hard-hitting, what he considers hard-hitting or fairly hard-hitting investigative journalism, which of course, as you know, in a small community does not always make you popular. So Andy and Bud are part of the editorial group that's kind of deciding on these issues and maybe making assignments with your help, but you're running it in your paper. And how does the community understand and differentiate that this is sort of a collaborative effort, or do they just get mad at you when you write that tough when you run that tough investigative piece in your paper?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think that we've been at this long enough, 6 years-ish now, that I think most readers understand the relationship, and we try to explain it, frequently, including with every story. But I would say in terms of reaction, most of what we do with Foothills is we have not done, sort of traditional sort of investigative exposés. It's more in-depth journalism about important issues that I think the community, by and large, the consensus is that people care about. So I think the reaction basically has been favorable. Now there's still, like with everything, there's still some people that are just deeply skeptical of sort of anything new, especially when it involves change. And Rappahannock I think that's a hot button issue. So anything sort of perceived to be an instigator of change it can be met with skepticism. And I think that at first, I think that was sort of more intense. Now I think most people have seen what we've done and understand and are fine with it.
I think people watching this in other counties that aren't as close to DC, we talked about this before, are going to go, gee, okay, maybe I could find 3 or 4 other people who really care about the community and supporting the newspaper locally, but how do I go about fundraising, Bud? How do I go about getting enough money together to create a 501c3 and put together a board and then start hiring freelancers like you all have done? How does that work for you all?
We are blessed, as Dennis described, with we're close enough to Washington, D.C., and yet far enough away that we're beyond the exurbs. And Rappahannock retains a very special character, very rural, very mountainous, no super highways, one traffic light. But it attracts a certain second homeowner, retiree, folks with ties to the Beltway and DC. So they come here equipped with great experience in government, the military, journalism, in academia, and so they're also capable of writing a check and making a donation. It's the lifeblood of a nonprofit like ours is community support. We've been blessed from the beginning with a pretty high level and a strong group of regular donors. We list every donor by name on our website. That's a mandate, being a member of the Institute for Nonprofit News. So fundraising is important. It is a big part of what our board does. It has paid for some really terrific journalism, explanatory journalism. We are also, this is where it starts to link our collaborative work with Bo and the Piedmont Journalism Foundation and Foothills and the for-profit newspaper company that Dennis leads, that we also, as part of our community, work with established foundations. We are served by a great Fauquier County Northern Piedmont Community Foundation. And from the beginning, we introduced our work to them and have benefited from a series of supportive grants from the Community Foundation. As well, we have a previous healthcare-based foundation called PATH. PATH Foundation is now an independent 501c3 foundation based in Fauquier County, but they have also been generous when we've reached out to them seeking funding for various projects that we've done. So one of the lessons is know your community. Find those folks who are interested in news, might be interested in supporting an organization like ours or like Bose. And in classic fundraising development style, keep them informed, keep them grateful, let them know that we're grateful for their support and that it's the lifeblood of the nonprofit supported journalism that we do.
Okay. Andy, you've kind of got your finger on the pulse of what's going on nationally. I know you talk about this in your classes and you're connected to other people who are doing surveys and studies on the trends. Is this replicatable, if that is a word, in other places in Virginia? I mean, could you see if there was enough community support that another county or another region of the state could do something similar to what you all have done?
Yes, I think the overall answer is yes. Maybe not exactly like we've done, but the concept I think is replicable. And in fact, I've had interest from people who have called me up and asked about this. You know, our community is struggling. And you mentioned Athens, Ohio. I only go there occasionally to go to campus, but for those not familiar with Athens, Ohio, it's a beautiful little town in the heart of southeastern Ohio, right in Appalachia, and it's surrounded by probably the poorest county residents in Ohio. So their question is, how could we possibly raise money here? And a lot of the initial discussions when people think about nonprofit journalism, they are thinking about something that will replace the existing or the newspaper that has died and gone away. Ours is different. We are trying to help them and supplement them. So there are all sorts of ways you can do that on the margins that are within our framework of Foothills Forum. I'll tell you one thing that we are talking about now involves fundraising, but we basically went to Dennis after he recently lost his longtime editor who decided to step down, and we were having this conversation. Dennis, what do you need in terms of coverage? And he said, well, really 3 areas. Youth sports, or sports generally, local sports, agriculture, huge in Rappahannock County, including viniculture, and the arts. So we have started a fund, we are fundraising, it's called the Shoe Leather Fund, and we hope to get $25,000 a year to help with that type of coverage. Now, your next question is, well, where are you going to find people that are going to write about agriculture? And the answer is, we don't know. But one idea we have is we may train them. There may be people in the community that, I mean, we're pretty smart people about journalism, and we got a lot of people that could help us educate them on the ethics, the basic grounding of fairness, accuracy, all these things. There may be somebody who's been a teacher and said, I just always wanted to cover sports, and they're in a position. That's the type of creativity that I think you need, that you help on the margins. It's also fun. I mean, it's fun to be creative. I've got a lunch tomorrow with a guy who wants to talk about maybe doing a video documentary that's news oriented with students in the high school. I have no idea where that's going to go, but you know, we want to try things like that. So, but the fundraising is key, and it's also has to be constant. And Dennis correctly said we are better known in the community in terms of what Foothills Forum is than we were. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say there are a lot of people that still don't, they wonder, what the hell is this thing? You know, and those are typically people that really don't understand independent journalism. That's just
Right.
what we're up against. And so we have to be constantly educating them about the importance of shared truth in a community and how that leads to discussions that create the right outcomes, thus the forum part of Foothills Forum.
Right. That's interesting because this speaker also brought that up. And really what you're talking about is media literacy.
Yes.
You're talking about the fact that for some, maybe they never knew, or maybe they've just become unfamiliar with the standards and ethics of journalism, the hard work, the transparency, the hoping to be apolitical and nonpartisan. And I think that's what most newspapers are and most newspaper reporters are, but I'm not sure the readers always know that. Has that been a problem for you, Bo, in your county? Because there's really nothing inherently wrong with a nonprofit owning a newspaper. It's no different than Tom Smith owning a newspaper. People say, well, we have some of those in Virginia. In addition to yours, we have some online only publications, as you all know, in Charlottesville and in Richmond, that are owned by nonprofits. And people say, oh, well, they're going to have some agenda. And I'm thinking, well, no more so than Tom Smith would have. Tom Smith could have an agenda. So how do you convince people that the Piedmont Journalism Foundation isn't just a front for, I don't know, some ideology that you're going to impose on the newspaper?
Well, the most important thing is the paper continues as it did before, and there's nothing imposed on it. I know when they ran the story that we were acquiring, somebody wrote in a letter saying, oh, this means the Washington Post journalism is going to be here and it'll be left journalism or something like that. And, from an operational point of view, we don't run the newspaper at all. A condition of our acquisition of the newspaper was that the managers and board of the newspaper remain. And at least, they had to for a reasonable period of time, the members of it did. So they still run it. We do not run it. We still have our little now 5-person nonprofit board that doesn't. We meet with them occasionally and talk to them, but the person that the publisher reports to of the paper is not me, but the managers that existed before and still do. And so they control what the paper runs. They are they've actually had no endorsements since our acquisition. I don't know if that's really changed. They're still a for-profit in theory business, but they've not made any endorsements. But that's really up to them. If I, as an owner with this group, would have anything to do with it, they would not endorse anybody ever. But because you can make your point by having both sides presented and let readers decide anyway. But we don't cover national politics at all, or even really statewide politics, except to the extent it affects Fauquier County. And so our website sort of explains, our PJF website explains how it works and what we do. But I think the proof is in the pudding, and that's what's in the paper, and that nobody would see any role of PJF at all, except in the occasional stories that we run. In fact, we ran a story this week that had a Foothills byline because it was on a project that they took the lead on and did all the reporting on, but we collaborated with them in terms of conceptualizing what would be covered, having a meeting on that, and with Dennis and others, along with the publisher, editor of the Fauquier Times, and Dana Priest and me, and the person they had as an author. And so after that, they did it all. But anyway, somebody would have seen that byline this week. And I think people understand that the paper gets journalism through collaboration, whether it is with their owner or occasionally with Foothills if we have an issue on regional health issues, or it could be something else besides that.
Okay. Dennis, this session today is about collaboration, but it's more specifically about collaboration at the local level. There is an organization that you're all familiar with. Chris Tyree started the Virginia Investigative Journalism Center, or Center for Investigative Journalism. I can never get his acronym right. And so this seems pretty doable at the local level. Is there a way to collaborate at a more regional or statewide level? Bo just referred to running a Foothills Forum piece or story or article in his paper or the Fauquier paper, but if VPA wanted to, or other people within the state wanted to, is this something that can be done more statewide? Or does journalism have to stay hyper-local?
No, I think it could be. I think that there are, issues of relevance to specific regions or even statewide where, you could sort of fashion a collaboration model to help cover. I think it would be hugely useful, actually.
Okay. And is that something that Bud and Andy, that the Foothills Forum would be ever interested in participating in? In other words, there would be some statewide sort of study or investigation that would take place on a particular topic. You start out with heroin. I mean, opioids, you could certainly do statewide. There's probably a lot of topics that you could do statewide. Would the Foothills Forum and other local organizations like yours collaborate on something? Would you be interested? I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm just trying to get a sense of, can this be broadened to something that could be done statewide?
Of course. I'll jump in very quickly, and then Bud, as our chairman, would be more authoritative on this. But I've often thought that one thing we should explore is there a way that collaboratively and with some fundraising we could hire someone that was in Richmond covering issues that are strictly agricultural. That's one way to do it. I would also add that I think that when you think broadly that way, you expand your fundraising opportunities. We have so far discussed here fundraising specific to supporting an organization, but there are many people that are willing to support journalistic coverage on a topic.
Right.
Now, it has to be done properly with transparency. It has to remain truly independent. But there are many people that are passionate about different things, and they are willing to step back from any involvement in saying what should be covered, but fund it and say, we just need coverage of this. So those are two areas I think I would quickly think about. Bud?
We did dip our big toe into the collaboration pond a couple of years ago. And what we were seeing and hearing around the country was a sort of a change in the way communities viewed the need for good quality journalism. Rather than have entities that might have been competitive compete. And Bowes County is a good example where the Fauquier Times has a competitor, an online, very good news site called Fauquier Now.
Yes.
Headed by Lou Emerson.
Right.
When just about the time Bo got started, we started talking to PJF about collaborating on reporting. And the first obvious topic for us in this region at the time was to take a look at the opioids crisis in the Piedmont. And together, Bo and I sort of crafted a public service reporting project involving the two for-profit news entities, the two nonprofit organizations represented here, PJF and Foothills. We reached out because the footprint changed to be a 4-county footprint that brought in Fauquier, Rappahannock, Culpeper, and Prince William. Both news organizations, Dennis's and Bowes, have footprints in Prince William County. So we brought in other players to this partnership, including Fauquier Now and Potomac Local News, an online entity of about 10 years that's been serving Prince William County. So 6 partners, 4 county footprint, opioids as the topic. We hired a great reporter who had worked with us previously, and they worked jointly for this collaborative group of news organizations. It was a 6-month investigative. It produced a 4 or 5-part series that ran in 2018 and 2019. Opioids Ripples. And we learned a whole lot in that first effort to work together and collaborate. That it's if you've been competitive in the past, collaboration isn't the first and most obvious thing. You have to sort of learn new behaviors. You have to set very clear grounds and guidelines in terms of who does what, when it's done, when it's published, including things like embargoes, so that everybody respects the rules and so forth. And it was a good experience. I'm glad we did it. We have just recently returned to working with Bo and Fauquier County with a series of reporting on COVID's, the hidden toll of COVID on health and schools and students, and this past week on people who already had substance abuse issues, drugs and otherwise. And the reporting tells a stark story of, in this region, 41% more drug-related deaths during the year of COVID than the previous year. And it's across the board. And drug abuse is up, alcohol abuse is up. And the reporting basically said we knew it was going to be bad. It has been bad, and we fear that it's going to be worse. So again, the instinct in that kind of collaborative reporting is to provide a public service to help a community understand what's coming and what needs to be done.
I want to put in a question we got from Sonny's listening in, and then I'm going to turn this conversation to sustainability. I want to kind of end on sustainability. I'm going to talk to all 4 of you about that. The question is, well, it's not actually a question. It's a suggestion for a statewide investigative collaborative project, loss of agricultural and air property by African Americans. It's interesting. This question came from Bonnie Winston here in Richmond. And Bonnie, this is a topic I know some papers are taking up. My son just wrote about this in Orange County. He works for the paper there. And so put this in your hats, gentlemen. This is an interesting topic, and I know that it's at play in all of your counties. I know that there are historic African-American farms in many, if not most, counties in Virginia. So thank you for that idea, Bonnie. It's an excellent one. To turn to sustainability for a minute, Dennis, I'm going to start with you. I'll put you on the spot. Andy, Bud, Andy McLeod, all the people involved are very passionate about this and very enthusiastic. But what happens if this sort of, they're going to say in a minute, it's not going to happen, and I hope that's what they're going to say. But, you know, if this were to wane, what would that mean for your paper? Your paper's become, I assume, a little bit reliant on these kinds of stories that they're able to produce for you. So how do you keep that going? If for instance, Foothills Forum just disappeared tomorrow, what does your paper do to continue that kind of coverage?
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, I would hope that there's been, you know, sort of both awareness and support cultivated in the community, you know, throughout this last 6+ years that we could, you know, tap or, you know, turn to try to continue, you know, support for, you know, in-depth journalism that we're doing. But I think that the main thing, is hopefully just continuing a strong collaboration with Foothills and with everybody involved.
Right. Andy, what kind of, and Ben can talk to this too, because he's one of the founders. What is your sustainability plan for the forum to keep generating this kind of content so that the Rappahannock News and potentially in the future other publications could benefit from it?
Yeah.
How do you keep that going?
Well, it's something that we obviously think about constantly. It's a never-ending concern. I think it starts with good journalism, because if you have a product that the community sees as valuable, it's easier to tell them that we can't possibly lose this, as opposed to trying to convince them why we need it. Foothills Forum, Bud can speak to this. We have a development committee, and we have a woman who is in the development area. She does this, she volunteers for us, but we have meetings every other week. And we're constantly thinking about this. So it's something we're doing. We're starting a season of this next week, actually at our home. We have what are called salons, and we will invite different people in the community. In our case, we're having just heavy hors d'oeuvres and a social gathering, but it's basically about 25 people coming together. Some of them have been small Foothills Forum contributors, but most have not. And really the pitch is, this is what it's about. This is why local journalism is important. And we will find a way to follow up and ask them for money.
Right.
Because you have to do that, but it's building awareness. And also, I think you have to be constantly thinking over the horizon. So one thing that our development committee is just now starting to think about is estate planning. We have, and I would say every community has, people with wealth that you may not recognize.
Mm-hmm.
And the key is to get to those people and tell them, look, you've lived here forever. You care about your community. This is something so fundamental to the community. Help us when you're no longer here to sustain this going forward. But it's a constant process.
Right. Bud, do you see, in addition to ramping up your development efforts, do you see adding other services, if you will, or other projects besides developing content? Is that another way to be sustainable?
Betsy, remembering that we want to make sure that Dennis's newspaper and newspaper company continues to be successful on its own, we're proud that together we jointly applied to the National Report for America program out of the box. And I think the first time we applied, we didn't get it, and we kind of went, oh, shucks. But the next year, the Rappahannock News and Foothills Forum team got Virginia's first Report for America Corps member. And in a newsroom where Dennis had a full-time editor, and that's basically it for the paid staff, except for some stringers and columnists, bringing in a full-time reporter doubled the staff. And
right.
It's a benefit to the newspaper. It shores up their ability to provide daily coverage. And because we can point to that, we think that we can keep that going. We're about to welcome our second Report for America Corps person next month to Rappahannock County. And we know that it's a good program that brings in quality journalists to our county. So it is sustainable. You have to work at it. You have to come up with some new ideas. And because Andy referred to the shoe leather fund as another example of helping Dennis and his company produce good journalism that meets their needs with the support of our nonprofit entity, just listening and reacting to their needs. We started that shoe leather fund only a few months ago, and we've already pretty much hit our first year goal, we're going to try to roll it over into a 3-year project. I foresee at the end of that 3-year term more quality journalism on agriculture and the arts and school sports as only the Rappahannock High School Panthers can provide.
Okay. Bo, we're running out of time here, but I want to finish up with giving you the opportunity to talk about yours. Your foundation owns the paper, so we want to obviously see your foundation thrive and continue forever so that you can be supportive of the paper. Do you have any particular plans for sustainability, or are you all just sort of taking it one day at a time, or how are you handling that?
Well, let me tell you, I've not mentioned the other condition when we acquired the paper was that the managers of the paper must endeavor to run it on a break-even basis. And we would help when they came short, or if there's a crisis or something, who could predict the pandemic and that effect on advertising last year? They quite a lot of needs when we first got them, and we did put money to, but they are being true. They're trying to keep their costs down, cut their costs down, and we can help fill some journalism that they can't beyond their core reporting. I don't think there's a silver bullet that a nonprofit can do. The paper has to try to run at a break-even basis at least. Right. It has to run like a business. And charity is not going to, you're not going to get community charity alone to throw it into a dark hole, as one person told us. They had to see the paper acting in a way that looked like it would be sustainable on its own, basically. And right. Then we would fill the niches and support that way. I think that's the most important thing I can say.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because you're a for-profit, you're a business, Dennis, your paper and your papers, and so is the Fauquier Times. And so that's why this collaboration is important. It's not all about nonprofit support. It's not all about, every newspaper in America becoming a nonprofit, because we know that's not sustainable. It's about collaboration between a business, an important business, a service business like a newspaper, and then people in the community like you all. I've learned a lot today. I think there are probably other questions. I'm probably going to send your contact information out to the people who attended this session and other registrants so they can get a hold of you. And I think VPA would like to talk to you as a group at some point about, trying this in other places and ways that we can collaborate statewide. But thank you so much. You're doing God's work as far as I'm concerned. And this has been great. And please keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Betsy.
Thank you.